Hey everyone, this is Mrs. Dunnigan, and I wanted to do a quick tutorial for you on active and passive voice from 8.1 Study Island for ELA. I am going to use a set of problems found at this EnglishForEveryone.org, and I've already downloaded this PDF that we can look at. So the first thing that you need to do when finding active and passive voice is that you need to know what a subject is, okay, before we even get into the definition of active and passive. So just as a reminder, a subject is the who or what is performing the action in the sentence. Okay, we kind of think of it as the movie star of the sentence, and the subject has to be a noun or a pronoun for the simple subject. Okay, so once you kind of have an understanding of that, and if you need extra help, there are some video tutorials that I've made on finding the simple subject and simple predicate. We are going to dive into active and passive voice. So right now, we're going to look at active voice, and when you have a sentence that's written in active voice, it means the subject is doing the action. Okay, for example, Liz played the piano. Well, who played the piano? Liz. You're going to notice that Liz is located in the subject part of the sentence. Okay, normally your subject is going to be found before the verb. Okay, so kind of on the left hand side of the sentence, so to speak. However, in passive voice, the sentence, in that type of sentence, the subject is going to receive the action. It's no longer found in the subject spot in the sentence. It's now moved to where we normally would find an object, like a direct object, an indirect object, or an object of the preposition. So the sentence, the piano was played by Liz. We've now rewritten that so that it's in passive. So we see that the piano is in the subject sentence, part of the sentence. However, the piano can't play itself, all right? And so when you think of your subject, that's the who or what is doing the action. So we know that when I say, well, who played it? Liz. Okay, but Liz is in the back of the sentence right now. It's being used as an object of the preposition. There are two things that you can look out for passive sentences. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes they are going to use the preposition by. So, like by Liz. Okay, the other thing that they may do is if you go back up to Liz played the piano, there's one verb there. Okay, in passive voice, oftentimes we're going to see a verb phrase. It's going to have for your helping verb one of the forms of to be. So am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. It's going to use one of those. Two of the most common would be was and were. Okay, and then that's going to be joined with the main verb, in this case played. So the sentence that uses the active voice is considered to be stronger. It oftentimes uses fewer words and it clearly shows who performs the action, okay, the subject. The sentence that uses the passive voice, though, is considered to be a little bit on the weaker side. It tends to be less direct. It is, however, technically not incorrect to use passive voice, and in certain forms of writing, passive voice is the preferred method. But oftentimes, like if you're writing in English, like a composition for English, active voice would be preferred. Sometimes the doer of the action is omitted in passive voice sentences. So for example, the piano was played. It doesn't tell you by who. Okay? So for this, these examples down here, we are going to figure out if it's active or passive, and then we are going to also identify the subject. Okay? So let's get started. For number one, we have Thomas feeds his dog. And so right now I would ask myself, well, who is feeding the dog? And I would get Thomas. Thomas is my my simple subject. And so I'm going to go ahead and highlight Thomas. And then that tells me since Thomas is doing it and Thomas is in the upfront part of the sentence that this is an active sentence. Okay. Number 2, the dog is fed by Thomas. Now it's easy to see, since we've done number 1, we can see that this one's passive. However, a couple things that I would point out that help me to know that is the dog is in the subject part of the sentence. However, the dog is not feeding itself. Okay, so when I really ask myself, well, who is feeding? We know Thomas is. It does have the by being used, okay, by Thomas, that prepositional phrase. And then notice your verb phrase is fed. We've got am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. That helping verb is plus fed, which we often see in the passive section, okay? So right now, dog is in the subject part of the sentence, but if I were to ask you who's really doing the action, it would be Thomas, okay? When I say Thomas feeds his dog for number 1, the reason that in number 2 I'm kind of highlighting Thomas as the subject, even though he's not in the subject position of the sentence, is if I go back up to number 1 and I say Thomas feeds what? Feeds is an action verb. The answer to feeds what would be dog. So dog is a direct object. So in number 2, what we see is the dog, which is the object, and Thomas, which is the subject, flip-flopped roles, or where they're found in the sentence. Okay? And number 3, the family went to the beach. So my vertical line separating my subject from my verb would be right between family and went. And then I'm going to see that family is the subject. And if I ask myself who or what went to the beach, the answer is family. So this truly is a subject, a simple subject, and it's fulfilling that role in the sentence. And so that would be active. Okay, number 4, the letter was written by Marshall. All right, so I immediately look and I see the letter, that's kind of the subject part of the sentence. If I ask myself, well, what or who was written, then that kind of helps me to see, well, who's doing the writing? Marshall is doing the writing. Okay, the letter can't write itself. Marshall's doing it, but Marshall is found in the back of the sentence. He's also located in a prepositional phrase that started with by. And then once again, our verb phrase was written, okay? If I were to make this into active voice, because right now it's passive, I would say Marshall wrote the letter, or Marshall writes the letter. Okay, for number 5, the game had been won by the blue team. So right now, game is in the subject part of the sentence. If I ask myself, though, had been won, who or what had been won, it's the blue team is doing the winning, okay? They're the ones who are winning the game. So team is going to be my simple subject. It should have been up front. If I said the blue team won the game, then I see that game becomes a direct object and it would have been behind the verb. So in other words, kind of long story short, number 5 is written in passive voice right now. Number 6, the problem was solved. Okay, so for this one, this is interesting because the problem was solved. Well, who or what is solving this problem? They don't say, and if you remember from the beginning, I said that sometimes in passive voice, who's actually doing it is omitted, but it would be very easy to kind of test it with the problem was solved by Mrs. Dunnigan. So we could end up adding in that prepositional phrase that starts with by. So as of right now, the problem is not solving itself. So this is not truly a real subject, even though it's in that subject part of the sentence. So technically this one is going to be in passive voice, okay? And then I'm not going to underline or highlight a subject because there isn't, we don't know who the subject is in this case. Number 7, the stuntman risked his life. So I see that man is the subject. Who's risking his life? The man. So I know for sure that this is acting as a simple subject, and that would be active voice. For number 8, the fire was extinguished. Okay, once again, I see was extinguished. That kind of sets off a warning bell in my head. And then I ask myself, well, who's really extinguishing this fire? I'm not sure, but if I tested it and said the fire was extinguished by the firefighters, I would have it set up more like number 2, for example. So this is obviously written in passive voice. even though that subject has been omitted, the by whoever has been omitted. Um, so hopefully that one makes sense to you. Number 9, the car was being cleaned by its owner. All right, so I see car is sitting in the subject part of the sentence, but I know that a car can't clean itself, so I need to ask myself who's truly doing the cleaning here, and so that would help me to see the owner should be doing the cleaning. So this really should have said, the owner cleaned the car, and that would give me, as of right now, it's in passive. The owner cleaned the car would be active. Number 10, it gets cold here during the winter. For this one, we are all set. It is kind of in the subject part of the sentence, and that would be active. Okay, and then for this next part, we're going to rewrite the passive sentence as an active sentence. So it says the dog was hit by the car. And since I'm in a PDF, I am just going to add a sticky note. I'll put it right here. Okay, and so I'm going to rewrite that one. And so I'm really asking myself, well, who is actually doing the hitting? It's the car. So I'm going to say the car hit the dog. And you're going to notice I'm using the exact same words as the passive voice sentence. The only difference is I am omitting the was and the by. Okay, so in number 2, the house will be built by the construction crew in 5 months. I'm going to add my sticky note. And I'm asking myself, well, who is doing it? So the construction crew will build the house in 5 months. And I know that's cutting off for you a little bit. Okay, so that would be active voice. All right, and so now we are going to jump down, and it's asking me to rewrite this as a passive sentence. So Julie answered the question. And let me move it down so you'll be able to see. Okay, so I know Julie is my subject right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip-flop Julie and question, which is the direct object. And I'm going to say the question was answered by Julie. That's now written in passive voice. All right, and then for the last one, the dolphins have learned many tricks. We're going to say, actually I'll say many tricks have been learned by the dolphins. All right, so I hope that this helps you to have a better understanding of active versus passive voice in writing. Thanks a lot, guys.